Support for this program comes from Jazz on the Tube, the Internet's largest collection of free streamable classic jazz videos. From Miles Davis to Louis Armstrong, from Thelonious Monk to Duke Ellington. You'll find it all on jazzonthetube.com. Start your free subscription today.
Hi, and welcome to Jazz Talk, a Jazz on the Tube podcast. My name is Ken McCarthy, and this is where we talk with people who are doing important work that supports and illuminates the music we love. The writers, the scholars, the educators, the filmmakers, the producers, and more.
Today we're talking with Randy Klein, and Randy's doing all kinds of very interesting things, as many people in the music world do. He is multidimensional, multi-talented, multitasking, and we're going to talk about some of the things that he does. Our focus is probably going to be on his work in being a music publisher, putting music out to the world via CDs and via streaming. Welcome, Randy.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for having me.
It's really great. I've been wanting to interview you for a long time, and we're having this interview at a most auspicious time. One of the many projects that Randy's work has supported over the years is the ongoing Afro-Cuban juggernaut of our mutual friend, Bobby Sanabria. And we've interviewed Bobby a lot on Jazz on the Tube because we think he's really a key person in a key field. And Bobby just did an amazing concert right at Lincoln Center in the band shell next to the Opera House. 5,000 people attended. My understanding is there wasn't an empty seat in the house.
It is correct. It was an amazing concert, actually. He just captured the audience, and the audience listened to West Side Story in Bobby's new reimagined context, and they loved it. I don't know how to say. It was just one of those very special musical evenings that, you know, every once in a while you're lucky enough to be present at. So,
I've heard. I missed it for various reasons. One of which is I live 100 miles away from the city, but I heard it was just absolute magic, and I have a feeling that this is going to continue. For example, he's going to be at the JFK Center with the Multiverse.
That's in January, and we're now building toward that event. There's some smaller concert venues that are coming up in the fall. I don't know the dates yet, but the big one that we're moving toward is the Kennedy Center on the 18th of January, and the phones are starting to ring, which I'm very happy for Bobby about this, and there are some festivals that are calling, and we're reaching out because this is a major festival. This is a major event for any festival, and there's not a festival in the world that could go wrong with this kind of event. It just touches humanity. You know, it's kind of weird thing to say, but that's what it does. You know.
Yep.
And the purpose of us releasing it is not only to promote Bobby Sanabria and his Multiverse Big Band, but was also to, with proceeds going back to the Puerto Rico Relief Fund, which is such a major cause for him, being that his family is originally from Puerto Rico. He grew up in the Bronx, of course, as he will tell you, and but the relief fund is very important to us, and I'm happy to say that we are getting downloads, we are getting streams, we're getting physical sales, and the numbers go up slowly because we're reaching out to more and more audiences. The bottom line is, so far it's a successful project, and I'm really pleased to have been involved in it and continuing to be involved in it.
I think it's going to have major legs. I think this is just the beginning of of a phenomenon. It's so in the zone. I mean, number one, Leonard Bernstein, just such an important part of American music history.
Well, he's important. He's a part of the fabric of American music history, and musical history. If you take music and spread it into its genre of musical theater. And as you are probably aware, West Side Story was originally a Broadway show. It went from Broadway show to movie, and from movie to the amount of every one of the songs in the score has become a known copyright and known by everyone around the world. I mean, songs like Maria and Tonight in America and Officer Krupke and I Feel Pretty and all of these, the list goes on. And because of the recognition factor, it helps, it's going even further with Steven Spielberg doing a new movie version of it.
Oh, really?
Oh, you're not aware of that? Yes, Spielberg is with Tony Kushner is writing the libretto, I forgot the director's name. But it's on the schedule. It's approved by the Leonard Bernstein organization, and it's going to just reignite this record, West Side Story Reimagined. I mean, what Bobby did is an instrumental version, and what Spielberg is doing is he's redoing the movie. He's redoing the Tony Maria Jets Sharks story. So that's coming out, but I don't know what there is no release date actually scheduled because we've been trying to find that out, but it's in the near future.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also an important work for jazz fans because, the deeper you get into jazz, the more you realize how important the Latin Caribbean influence on the formation and the innovation and the perpetuation and the advancement of jazz is. It's not a sideshow. It's actually right in the blood of the music. And the more we know about Latin music, the more we're going to enjoy music in general. And this, in addition to all the other things that this recording is it's a little course in Latin rhythms.
That's right. And that was something that I'm not an expert in, and I would never say that I was. But Bobby is a walking history book about it, So I go to his concerts, and I'm learning. It's a master class for me, and that's always a wonderful thing to have new musical knowledge coming into your brain,
Yeah.
So the collaboration between Bobby and myself has been very strong over the years, and continuing. It just keeps going.
And I think that the another element to this is I think anybody of conscience has looked on in horror at the way our Latino brothers and sisters have been treated in Puerto Rico.
It's quite disgraceful what's gone down there. My wife and I go to Puerto Rico a lot, and we have over the last 7 or 8 years, and we've driven all over the island and gone to all of the museums and gone to the beaches and to El Yunque, the rainforest, and we have our favorite spot up in the western part of the island where you see the sunsets, which is in the little town of Rincon. So we're not just coming to this because I happen to like the music. We really love this island. It's a paradise, and I don't understand why the United States doesn't embrace it. But that's a whole political discussion,
Sure. But this cultural initiative, I think, is very important.
This is very important. I am in total agreement with you. Jazz had started out as a very small label, mostly because I couldn't get my own work picked up by jazz labels. I was shopping my stuff to everybody. Now, this is circa 1992. and it was suggested to me to release CDs myself, which, if you think about it, put me a little bit ahead of the curve of people of artists, musicians and artists self-releasing their CDs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning, I was really like people saying, "Oh, you can't do this," and I said, "But why not? Nobody will take my music." But as with all of the artists that are on the label, we have something in common, which is we all really believe in what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I grew up in the world of songs and the record business, I said, well, it's just a natural occurrence. I never thought we'd get to the place where we are now, where we have worldwide distribution, both physically and digitally, and we have streaming services and all, and we're doing all the same things that a major label does. So we're just tinier in terms of scope. But it's
so the label started initially. And by the way, the label we're talking about is Jazz Heads, JAZZHEADS.
Jazz Heads. And we started it in '92. We have a list of major musicians who have played on these recordings. One of the criteria that I set a long time ago is that the recording quality would always have to be very high. That's because I'm just really picky about that kind of stuff, and I think that if you're going to record, you should do it right. And so the records, for the most part, are very well produced. The music level is really high. We've had a wonderful set of releases. Bobby's one of them. Chris Washburn's Sciotos Band is another group that's been on it. Mark Weinstein. Currently, we have Ronnie Ben-Hur and Harvey S., a really wonderful record called Introspection. Andrea Brockfeld, the flautist, she's an amazing player, had a new CD this year called If Not Now, When, which is a really wonderful recording, and we go on, and the list goes on and on and on, And I've released my own recordings. What a choice! That's why I started the label.
Well, it's a great. If you think about it, who is better to run a label than a musician composer? Because who understands the product better? I mean, and I think this has been a big problem in the recording industry. Always is there's such often a huge. Or now everything's changed, but in the old days there was such a huge gap between the business people and the people actually creating the music. And
you're absolutely right, Ken. It's the gap is closed because the musicians were forced to take it into their own hands, and that's why you see so many artists self-releasing, and that process has forced artists to realize. See, they also realize how hard it is to actually record a record and make it sound good. Mm-hmm. I mean, even with all the technology in the world, you can have all this technology to be able to make records sound good, but if you don't have the musical ears to be able to do it, all the technology is worthless.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been part of the process. I've also been really lucky. When I didn't start I'm a songwriter originally.
Okay.
But I didn't start songwriting. I'm a pianist first, but I'm a songwriter, and I didn't start songwriting until I was in my late 20s. And some of my earliest songs got picked up by the legendary R&B artist Millie Jackson.
Oh, wow.
And on Polydor Records. And she recorded about 8 or 9 of my songs. 2 of them are on gold albums. One is on a platinum album. I mean, and she's in the R&B Hall of Fame. This is like classic R&B. But because of those recordings, I was able to go to recording sessions back in the day when recording was done on 24-track tape. And even pre that, like 16-track tape, and just sit and observe how these records were made.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, again, I use the word masterclass, but for me, I was lucky to have a friend like Millie Jackson who would say, "Hey, come to the session, sit there, and just learn." And that's what I did. I just observed and learned, and because of it, I took that knowledge base with me, and it was part of what brought jazz heads around to be a really. I mean, the recording of Bobby Sanabria's recording. I mean, he did such an excellent job, and I'm listening to the roughs, I'm listening to the mixes, I'm listening to the master, and, giving my 2 cents of critique to Bobby and saying, hey, I think you've nailed it, or hey, no, I think you need a little bit more of this or that. So I take a very hands-on approach with the label, and I think I always will, just because, I'm a bit of a perfectionist in that matter.
I worked briefly, literally managing a record label. I don't know. Do you remember India Navigation? It was a label in the 70s and 80s, run by Bob Cummins, and they were the first to record Chico Freeman and James Newton and Anthony Davis and just Jay Hogarth, a whole bunch of what they called young lions in those days. And this was in the record days, pre-CDs. Yeah, vinyl. And long play, 33 RPMs. Yeah, and all I want to tell our listeners is it's a tough business. There's no gimmies in it. It's really hard.
I mean, because sometimes you put out a record and you really believe in it. You believe in it musically. You've done all your homework in terms of how it sounds. You've done everything you can in terms of getting the radio people behind it and press people behind it, and the record sells 2 copies.
Mm-hmm.
And you're stuck then with what I refer to as a million seller, a million in your cellar, and then you have to store them for the rest of the time.
Yep.
So there are warehouses around this country filled with CDs that don't sell anymore, partly because we don't listen to CDs any longer, and the manufacturers don't even put CD players in computers any longer. So the format is basically going away. But at the same time, there's a discrepancy here because audiences like to hold on to things. It's just a sense. It's a kind of a natural feeling to. I bought something. I'd like to hold on to it. So the concept of streaming, the concept is very what's it called? It's disposable. I listen to it. I don't have to hear it again. I don't have to collect it on my shelf. It's disposable, and that's dangerous to me because it doesn't allow something to settle in for a long time.
Yeah, let's talk about something else that's dangerous in that streaming world: the royalties that companies like Apple and Spotify pay.
Well, they're getting better, but they're still not where they're still not. We're still penny pinching. We're still, as a small label, we still are looking at the bottom line every month and saying, where are we? What's the cash flow? Where can we promote? It's not like you're rolling in dollars. You're not. It's not the nature of the industry any longer. But larger labels, Blue Note, Concord, Sony, to name a few, and have the great asset of having large catalogs,
mm-hmm.
and those large catalogs continue to sell. And there's no outlay for those catalogs. They just sit in streaming. So if, let's use an example, say Miles Davis kind of Blue streams, there's no promotion going into that. There's no dollars being spent on it. It's just being streamed. So it becomes a small little pot boiler for the label. Multiply that times of catalogs of 10,000, 20,000 tracks, 30,000, 100,000 tracks, as Blue Note, Concord, and Sony have. And this is why they're able to still make a lot of money. A smaller label doesn't have that catalog.
Right. I think the Chris Anderson coined the term the long tail. The idea being that in a physical world, you can only put so many things on a shelf, right? But in this virtual world, you could have a catalog of 100,000 albums, and you might only...
And they do. And what's funny is we also live in a society that has this quality that is referred to as random. And so someone is just surfing through the web, and they land on some streaming site that happens to have an obscure track from one of my Jazz Heads recordings, and I see it show up as a stream, and it doesn't make a lot of. It makes like 0.0003 cents, but I see it nonetheless. And I say, okay, it's 0.003 cents, but it's from a record that came out in 1995. And I'm saying, how, so the lifespan of a recording is forever now. And the random nature of the industry makes it like every day you wake up and there's some surprise on your computer screen. It's different. It's a different way of existing. It doesn't have the same thing as when we walked into a Tower Records and the record that was end-capped, end-capped for audiences that are listening, were the record that was right at the end of the aisle that would draw your attention to it. Well, that was a promotion that was paid for by the record company. And now the promotions are things like banners and streaming and social media boost and things like that, but it's not anywhere near what it used to cost. So the cost factor is down, but your chance of getting more sales is greater.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's just a different way of looking at the industry. The industry has changed. So, where it's going to go from here, it's hard to say. I don't think it's going to go I think the streaming numbers will go up because there are organizations like BMI, ASCAP, CSAC that are fighting for it. And the labels, of course, are all fighting to get companies like Spotify to raise their rates, to pay higher royalty percentages. So it's very, very interesting,
Well, a piece of jazz history kind of comes to mind as we talk. There was a musician strike in the 40s where jazz musicians, and maybe all musicians, I don't know, I'm just aware of the jazz element, refused to record for a couple of years, I think.
I don't know anything about that. That's interesting.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, I'm unaware of that.
Yeah, that's why we're missing a piece of bebop history, because right when bebop was taking off, there was basically a musician strike against record labels. And maybe we need I don't know if musicians can weather it, but that would be interesting if suddenly everybody got together and said, hey, Spotify, you're not getting any new stuff.
I've had this conversation with Bobby a couple of times about how politically involved musicians get. And there's a line that is drawn because musicians are paying attention to their music, and the minute they stop paying attention to it, the music, and if they put their energy into the politics, then all of a sudden their music suffers.
Right.
There's a downside to it. So a musician has to be a little bit. They have to be selfless. At the same time, they have to be selfish. And that's a hard one. That's the balance that a musician plays all the time.
Yeah, I don't think we realize, as fans, we appreciate the music, obviously, but when you see Bobby Sanabria or somebody like that, we don't realize the utter, endless, never-ending dedication that's required to keep things going.
I mean, on a personal note, I wake up in the morning every morning and I do my writing first, because the minute the phone starts to ring, it pulls me out of that space, and it's very difficult to get back into that musical space.
Sure, and it is a kind of an alternate reality, and it's not fragile, but it requires protection.
Oh, I actually think it is fragile.
Okay.
Not to disagree, to argue with you about it, but I think that it is fragile, and it can be. I don't want to use the word destroyed, because that's a little bit overzealous.
How about disrupted?
I think disrupted, and it takes. And if you're pulled out of the space, you have to find your way back.
Mm-hmm.
And every artist does it in their own way. You know, they have to have the quiet, they have to have the concentration, and they have to not be distracted by something that is going to pull them out of that space. And it's a matter of, disciplines. Do I shut the phone off? Well, if I shut the phone off, then I'm not going to get the call for the gig.
Right.
If I shut the phone off, then I can't be promoting myself at the same time as I'm trying to write that music that everybody wants. Mm-hmm. Again, it's the combination of being selfless and selfish at the same time, and the two things are far apart, and you have to figure out a balance.
Yeah, and then you're also dealing with music, which is its own universe. And then you're dealing with the nitty-gritty of business, getting paid, getting gigs.
Yeah.
Which is
in the music, in terms of when I'll use, if I'm working on something, I'm working on a piece right now, I literally put Post-its about where I was when I shut it down. So at least it gives me, and it's, electronic Post-its, it's physical Post-its. I put something on the score to say, this is where you left off, this is what you were thinking. Now, when you come back to it, it's never the same place.
Right.
So that is the challenge, and it's the challenge of everyone, regardless of whether they're an instrumentalist who is a soloist, who is just perfecting the way they play and improvise, or a composer who is writing a new piece, a new work.
And so you're we alluded to this earlier, but you're an example of someone, and this is true for so many people in the music world, you're not just doing one thing. You're not in an ivory tower composing all day. You've got the composing. You've got the business related to composing. You've got the record label, which is a huge undertaking. You're an educator as well. There's a big juggling act going on all the time.
I refer to as the many hats.
Mm-hmm.
I multitask pretty well. I try to keep things balanced to the best of my ability. But when one project takes hold, sometimes you're in that project, and you know that you can't do everything else around it, so that you have to trust your mechanism that you're going to be able to get back to those other things that you do. You have to trust your mechanism to be able to do it. And that's a skill set unto itself, and not something that I necessarily was born with, but it was something that I've been practicing and continue to work on, because it's difficult. You have to, I'm working on a jazz piece, and then all of a sudden the phone rings, and I have to spend the next 4 days working on West Side Story Reimagined, Bobby Sanabria, and all of the stuff that's going on with it. And there's a lot, including TV appearances for Bobby, and concerts that are coming up, and the marketing, and money coming in, money going out, all of it. And then I have, then at a certain point, I have to switch back. But you have to trust that ability that you can. So that's the lesson that is way easier for me to say than for me to try to teach anybody. It's just something you have to learn.
When we look at some of the great jazz people of the past, even, if we take Duke Ellington, one Well, he wasn't just playing piano. He wasn't just composing. He wasn't just appearing on the stage with his peerless orchestra. He had to run that business too. He had to get people on buses and trains and planes, and it's like I look at that as I get older and I get involved in more things myself. I look at that and I'm just in awe.
I guess. Well, he had a machine around him. He had people who he trusted to help him with these things, as I've done with my life too. There's a bunch of people that I have to speak to every day to keep them all moving in the same direction. It's a team of people that are doing this, and I always the TV station American AMC.
Yes.
Well, they had a AMC, I think AMC Kids, and there was a special. They did a short documentary of what's his name? Star Wars. The writer of Star Wars. Help me. Come on,
George Lucas.
Who?
George Lucas?
Yes, George Lucas. Thank you. I was having a senior moment there. They talked about George Lucas, and they interviewed him, and he said, the way he described it, he says, I have a little house on my property, which is my writing place, where I go and I write and I do my work. And he says, and then one day a week, I go to the office, and I go there early in the morning, and I spend the whole day there with all of the things I have to do for that week. And at the end, and all the people he works with report to him, and this is the method that he talks about, that he separates the business from the creative.
Gotcha.
And this is a discussion that goes on and on. I've seen it at many, many jazz educators, network conventions. How do you separate the creative from the business? Is the ballpark title.
So if we have any young musicians in training, or people at the beginning of their career, this is a skill that also needs to be cultivated, and it's something that you get better and better at.
Yes, and because everyone has a different personality and functions differently. Some people like working in the morning. Some people like working 3 a.m. at night. I mean, everyone is different. Everyone does it differently. You have to train that mechanism within yourself to be able to function in both the creative and the business manner. But something that I have found, which I really find is fun, is that I've started, and I've been doing this for a good decade now, or even longer, whereas I try to use the creative aspect of writing music within the creative aspect of business, because business can be very creative.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think the success that we've been having in the last couple of years is because of my getting better at that.
Got it.
And I laugh at it because I know that like tomorrow it's not going to work.
Right.
I have it down today, but I don't have it. Tomorrow's a whole other day, and you never know.
Well, the business is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's endlessly fascinating. You will never be bored in the music business.
You think?
Yeah. On the other
really.
hand,
it's like
I envy people like doctors and lawyers and contractors. They have a little variety, but basically people show up. They do things for them. It's somewhat predictable. You're not having to go out and invent a new brand of medicine or invent a new area of law. Whereas when you're a musician and a composer, you have to invent something that the world has never seen. I mean, that's the whole.
Yeah, you're creating something out of nothing, is the expression we use around here. Okay, how do we invent it? And then you have to define what it is.
Right.
But then there's like the fun things. Like this is years ago. An assignment came in to me as a composer. I was doing more commercial writing at the time, and it was like an industrial that was taking place out at the Las Vegas Convention Center, and it was a company that built rock climbing walls for gyms.
Okay. Yeah.
and they were displaying their new rock climbing walls. So they created this wall that would have like somewhere like 12 to 18 climbers climbing all at the same time, and they wanted to a piece of music written for it, so that the climbers would go climb to the top, and then they would push themselves off and come to the bottom. So it kind of looks like an ongoing waterfall because everybody climbs it. You can imagine it, you know. I mean, and so I had to write it, and and it was very successful. It was a nice piece of music. I don't remember it now, but it was like a ballet for rock climbing wall. You know, I mean, so that the phone rings and somebody says, "Hey, I need a ballet for rock climbers." You know, and you go, "Sure, no problem, I can do it." You know, but that's the world that we live in, and somebody actually thought that up. Somebody imagined it before the music was even involved. They were imagining this humongous rock climbing walls with people jumping off of it. But, you know, I mean, the absurdity of the industry is what is entertaining in itself, you know, I mean.
Well, I find that people that survive and thrive in the industry very often have great senses of humor. You know, I'm not saying they're going to be stand-up comedians, but they just
I refer to it's sort of an out sense of humor. I put the word "out" in quotes. You know, like outside of the norm. Exceptionally, somebody who's exceptionally straight may think of it as even use the word "weird" and say, "Oh, that's so weird." But to me, it's the absurdity is what makes it funny. Many years ago, oh boy, I'm dating myself now. I played piano at the Comic Strip, which is on 2nd Avenue on the East Side. It was the comedy club where like people like Seinfeld and Eddie Murphy and all these guys started out. And I was the pianist. I'd bring them on, you know, Eddie Murphy, you know, that kind of stuff. And I remember after about a year of doing that gig, I stopped laughing at jokes because I was analyzing just like the comics. So if you would sit at the bar and listen to the comics, they would say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this joke." It would be like da da da, and the comic somebody listening would say, "Yeah, that's funny." You know, no laughing,
right.
just a sense of the sense of the analysis of the joke. Yeah, that's funny. But what would make those guys laugh is if something was really like a 3-level joke, and I can't do one off the top of my head, but it's like something that made them laugh and laugh for 3 different reasons. Those were the really successful ones. And I think that's what musicians react to.
Yeah,
because of the absurd world that they live in the first place. I mean, if you think about it, musicians don't really live in a reality. They live in sort of a surreal existence that kind of is random. Back to that word.
Yeah, waiting for the gig, traveling to the gig, killing time in between the gigs, rehearsing, creating a new material. It's amazing all that goes on. And it's a very different way of life than the average person.
And having a trust in the universe to take care of them. Which is a part of it, which isn't discussed a lot, but I would say any musician who has been in this for a long time and lives it, they have a trust that there's something taking care of them, so that they can keep doing what they do.
Well, if you think about it, unless you're playing with an orchestra or something, or a touring band, you're kind of perennially unemployed, and it's your job every day to figure out the next thing. You know, it's not like a new music factory is going to go open up and you can.
Wow, Ken, I never knew that. No, I'm only kidding you. I'm being stupid now. It's like
Well, part of the reason, part of these calls is to give fans just a sense, of what goes on behind the scenes, so that they can appreciate the art even more. To me, it helps me appreciate the art more.
Sure.
And then if you're ever in an opportunity where you get to chat with a musician, you're a smart fan. You understand the guy may be tired, or the gal may be tired, or
there is a true story that I can tell, that I used to go to a Christmas dinner party many years ago out of this a friend of my it was a friend of my wife's who had this party, and no one would know each other. They were all, like, everybody there was a friend of the person throwing the party, but nobody knew each other. So when we would sit down for dinner, we would always, like, go around the table, like, well, what do you do? What do you do? And I would always say, I'm a composer. And one time, everybody did that, and the lady across the table said, so what do you do all day? And without thinking about it, I used the old joke, I sit around decomposing. And, of course, everybody really thought that was very funny, but in some way, there's some truth to it. It's like you're waiting. That's what you said, which is very, very important. You're constantly waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based off of the efforts that you've put into it, that you put it out there, and you're hoping that it's going to come back to you.
Yep.
So the more you put out there, with a little bit of luck, and if it's good work, which is something you must underline, you have to put out great work.
Yeah.
If you don't, you're not going to get called.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. It really is, particularly in jazz, because the people who really know this world and really have the ears, who can really hear this stuff, they'll call you on it in a minute.
Yep. I can't think of another profession, and I'm even including brain surgery and rocket science, where the professional standards are so high.
Well, they are as high as neurosurgery or rocket science. They have to be perfect. You're striving for something that doesn't exist. Remember, perfection doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So you're striving for something that is as close to it as you can humanly get. This is a conversation unto itself.
Yep.
I mean, this is a whole other interview about, what do you have to do to really keep it sharp? And that's where the dedication comes in, and that's where believing in what you do and honestly knowing that it's good. I mean, many people there are people who fool themselves, but, really knowing that you have something and you're saying something. It takes time to realize that. You don't learn this right away.
And the tremendous self-discipline to keep at it, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it,
And we're also in an industry, because of the business, it's a business that likes the young Turks. Right. As the expression. They like the young people. And what tends to happen is the older guys who are, because they've learned so much, now they get into their 60s and they're really saying something, and they tend to get ignored a little bit. And that's an issue, but not so much in jazz, because jazz tends to respect its elders.
Thank goodness. That's one of the many...
I was lucky to go to Sonny Rollins' 80th birthday concert at the Beacon Theater here in New York, and on the stage was Sonny, who was 80, but then there was Roy Haynes, who was 85. There was Jim Hall, who was the youngster. He was 75 at the time, and then the baby in the band was Christian McBride. He was at that point, was already just turned 40, or was like late 30s, and then as the guest artist, it was Ornette, who was older than Sonny, you know. So you have these guys, and it was, I'm using the word masterclass. It was a beyond this earth masterclass in terms of improvisation. And that's recorded somewhere too. That concert.
I've heard pieces of it. Yeah, it's worth seeking out.
It's the duet at the end, between Sonny and Ornette is a really profound moment in improvisation. Yeah, it's really great.
And wow, talk about a historic pairing.
Yeah,
wow.
Among other things, among other things, The two,
yeah, that's one of the,
but that's the point. That's the point of think of the amount of wisdom that went into those solos. Did not come from a youngster.
Right.
It couldn't have. It's impossible.
Right, and then the two of them listening to each other and reacting to each other. I mean, now we're into the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension. It's really out there.
Anyway,
yeah.
Any more questions?
I do. I have one more, if you don't mind.
No, I don't.
In addition to running jazzheads.com, which I strongly urge everybody to check out, Bobby's CDs are there, but there's a lot of other great music there. In addition to being a composer, you're also a songwriter, and you have a book on the teaching of songwriting, or on how to write songs.
I woke up one morning and I came up with this idea that this was like one of those ideas that morphed, and I'm going, why did I think this idea? The idea is simple. Anybody can write a song regardless of whether they're musical or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is people sing in the shower, people feel a beat, so why can't somebody write a song? That was the idea, and it morphed into about 400 pages about songwriting of this world I had been studying while doing everything else, and it just spewed out of me. It took about 4 years to complete the whole thing, and then when I went to get it published, every publisher said, it's too big, cut it down. So I cut it down to its simplest idea, which is the Quick Start Guide to Songwriting, which is the title of the book. And it's available on Amazon, and now I'm working on another book called The Art of Listening to Songs to Learn from Songs, which is listening to great songs, doing an analysis of them, and seeing why they work. That's coming out hopefully in 2019, I think. So yeah, there's that part of my world, which is songwriting, which I really love. I attend a lot of songwriting workshops, and I still present my own songs at workshops, believe it or not. I like the feedback, because when you write, you're too close to it. So having people who are critical of it, who are going to try to find mistakes in it, is always good.
I didn't realize there's a whole world of songwriters getting together to compare.
Yep, songwriting workshops. BMI has one of the most famous ones, which is the Lehman Engel BMI workshop. I've been a member of that workshop since 1982. I'm a long-time member of that. I've written many, many musical theater pieces. And then there's the Songwriters Collective, the New York Songwriting Collective here in New York City. There's songu.com out of Nashville. These are all workshops. I'm involved in all of them in some aspect. And I do analysis of song lyrics and why songs work and how a songwriter can become a better songwriter. It's just another world. It's another hat.
Uh-huh.
And
well, hey, Randy, when that book is ready for the world, I would love to have you back on again to talk specifically about the art of songwriting. It's something that we've never addressed on.
Oh, I would love to. It's kind of on the top of my favorite subject list of favorite subjects to talk about. We're doing. I'm conducting. You'll like this. You know, there's a place called the Sugar Bar. It's owned by Valerie Simpson from Ashford and Simpson, who wrote Ain't No Mountain High Enough.
Oh, cool. No, I didn't know about it.
There's a club club. They have a club. It's on 72nd Street here in the city. And starting in September, every other Tuesday night, we will be doing the Happy Hour Songwriting Workshop, which takes place at happy hour, so that we can drink through it, I guess. And, it's a workshop on songs. We'll have special guests and all kinds of stuff, industry people as well as writers.
Oh, how fun! Now, tell us again when that meets and
it's going to be every other Tuesday night, starting September 11th, going all the way through the fall and onward, at the Sugar Bar on West 72nd Street. It's called Happy Hour Songwriting Workshop.
Well, all of us who love jazz love songs, and the more we know about how they're put together and what's involved in creating a good song.
I would love to do another one of these with you on that subject. It's really interesting, and it goes all over the place because you're forced to have to go back to look at songs from the past, all the way back to the turn of the 1900s, and why those kinds of songs influence, say, the songs of the Beatles, and how the Beatles songs influenced. And how the Beatles were influenced by the songs of the Great American Songbook, because that's where the Beatles' early structures came from. I'm not going to get into this now; it's a whole other thing. But
we'll do that for the next time, and I think that's going to be fascinating because songs are one of those things that for a fan, it's kind of like the trees and the sky and the clouds. They're just sort of there. And I think when you start to understand, what's involved in writing a good song? Why is this a good song? Why did this song last for so many decades? Why do so many people cover it? That could be a very interesting...
there's an interesting article in today's New York Times about the song Respect that Aretha made into a national anthem, actually. And it talks about the whole how royalties worked on that song, and how Aretha really never received royalties on that song because she wasn't the writer. It was Sam Cooke, the great Sam Cooke. It's a fascinating article. It's a fascinating article.
Cool. Well, we've been talking with Randy Klein of JazzHeads, that's plural.com, a great label that's doing great work. If you're a music lover, dive into it and discover the gems that he's produced over the years. And we're already looking forward to his book that's going to come out on the art of songwriting and how songwriting works. Randy, thank you so much for the time. Thank you also for your great work. It's something I didn't say at the beginning of the call, but I meant to, which is that without people like you, we wouldn't have recorded music. We need the artists, obviously, but you also need the people that are willing to do the really heavy lifting of taking that music and getting it into a form that we can access. So,
Yeah, you're more than welcome, and thank you for the compliments. That's, makes me feel good, and I can make it through another day.
Great. Well, this has been...
Thank you, Ken. This has been really joyful. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, well, thank you. And this has been Ken McCarthy of Jazz on the Tube, talking with Randy Klein about all things related to music.
Okay, thanks again. Speak to you soon.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, please share it. That's how we grow. And remember to subscribe to JazzOnTheTube.com, the Internet's largest collection of free, streamable, classic jazz videos.